I'd just like to say a special thanks again to the organizing committee. They did such a fantastic job this year, and I know that they've run themselves ragged just to make sure you have as great a conference as possible. So could we have a round of applause for them? That would be really good. And as someone who's been participating in this conference, I've had an absolutely amazing time. That's because of the fantastic conversations that I've had with you guys and all the things that you've done. It wouldn't be the same conference without you, so thank you very much for being here. So, up on stage right now, we Jim has just handed me an iPhone with a list of questions in the smallest font possible. One moment where we deal with the technical things. So on the stage right now, everyone here has the commit bit on the Selenium project or one of the affiliated ones. I think it's probably a good idea to do an introduction because it's fairly rare for us to get everyone around at the same time. So I'll start and then I'll pass the microphone around. I'm Simon Stewart. I am the creator of WebDriver. I'm the current project lead, and I make a lot of stupid choices, and these guys tell me that I'm an idiot sometimes.
I'm Jason Leba. I've been with the project about 5 years now. Work on a little bit of everything across the project, yeah.
I'm David Burns. I look after all the Python bindings and kind of a few other things mainly related around Firefox and kind of moving things to Marionette.
I'm Santiago Sardonias. I would say a bit of everything as well.
Hi, I'm Ivan De Marino, and I mostly support the driver for Fandom.js.
Hi, I'm Andreas Tolfsen. Been involved in the project for a couple of years now. I initially did some work on the Opera driver, done some work on the Java stuff, and now currently I'm working on the WebDriver W3C spec.
Hi, I'm Kevin Menard. I've been in the project for about 3 years now. I mostly do Grid. I've done some with Browser Mod Proxy and some with iOS driver as well.
I'm Yari. I maintain the Ruby bindings and been doing that for 3 years.
I'm François, and I'm looking after Grid.
Luke Inman-Semerau. I do docs and a lot of other minor things everywhere else and annoy people.
Hi, I'm Jim. I work on the IE driver and the .NET bindings and whatever else kind of trouble I can get into.
Okay, so what we're going to do, we'll take a mix of pre-recorded questions that you guys have been filing earlier, and if you've got a live question and there's a burning thing you want to ask us, there's a microphone over there. Please feel free to walk over to it. If you can't find it easy to get to, raise your hand and one of us will repeat the question. There's a few. What was the surprise from? Okay, cool. So the first question, we'll take one from here. There isn't a live one. How do these Selenium committers decide which bugs to fix? If I see there is an open issue for a problem I'm experiencing, should I add a comment? Yeah. Before any of us could say a word, Marcus in the front goes, "You should fix it." So if you've got something to add to the issue, like some more information that might help us debug it, feel free to add a comment. If you just want to be notified of it and keep track of it and let us know that you're interested in it, Google Code has a little star feature, and you click on that. And then we occasionally look at bugs and see how many stars there are if we ever feel like we should be fixing bugs. How do we decide to fix bugs? I don't know about you guys, but the way I do it is I tend to run into an issue, and then I go and fix that particular one. I don't have a lot of free time. We're all mostly doing this, the Selenium work, as open source contributors, as volunteers. And so people are working on this project because they love what the project is and what it does, and not necessarily because they're being paid oodles of cash to go through the bug tracker and fix all the problems. Guaranteed ways to make your bug be fixed more slowly. Number one, ask us when it will be completed. Or demand a timeline. Like, the more insistent you are, the less likely we are to start fixing it, because it's like, yeah, there's enough rude people out there anyway, we don't need that. Best way to get your bug fixed would be to include a minimal test case that ideally is in a zip file or as a gist, where we could run it and we can replicate it very easily. Ideally not against a live website, because I don't know if you've noticed it, we don't get to the bugs very quickly. And if we get to it 6 months after you've filed it, and that website has changed and we can't replicate the issue, we're going to close that bug because it's working as intended. Does anyone else want to add something to that?
Yeah, I'm only to echo a lot of what Simon said. Personally, I pretty much glance at every bug that gets entered into the system, and I can tell you that if you want your bug to be fixed fast, a test case is a must. I've almost gotten to the point, honestly, where if it doesn't have a test case, the chances of me actually fixing it are probably pretty small.
I mean, the chances are fairly slim anyway. But
well, this is true.
Even slimmer.
Unless you work at a company that one of us work at, and there's an internal pressure, that also helps get bugs fixed.
That's not always a guarantee.
Bribery.
We're open to bribes.
Yeah, I remember getting a bug fix in a bouncy castle by sending hot sauce and T-shirts to the developers, and that actually worked out.
There's also a set of bugs that we've tagged as getting involved. Like, these are the bugs that we think are going to be fairly easy for someone who's not terribly familiar with our code base to go in and fix. We'd be able to fix more bugs if we had more people contributing more code, and the best way to get started is to take up one of those getting involved bugs and actually getting involved. Cool. I hope that answered the question. We don't have a live question yet, so we'll go down to the second one. I've seen dozens of frameworks and starter projects Java on GitHub and other places, and a lot choose not to use Page Factory and Find By, instead rolling their own element location strategies. Personal preference, or I have no idea what that abbreviation is short for. Does anyone want to take this one? I'm not writing these example things, so I have no idea what's going through their heads. Anyone?
I tend not to use the annotations, I've gone both ways. I've used them and not used them. It depends on the project. It depends on whether the project that I'm working on is going to use it needs to have the elements found in using the annotations, or whether it's good enough that we can roll our own way to populate the elements in our page object.
Bless you. Okay. Any advice or recommendations for the best place to get started contributing to open source? Selenium. Yeah. Obviously, Selenium is an absolutely massive project. Santi, do you want to talk about the workshop you did?
Yeah, we started a new effort to rewrite the docs for Selenium. The current docs are quite old. We started those 6 years ago, maybe 7. That was what got me started in Selenium and got me the commit bit. So we're working on a new set of docs, Selenium 2 focus. If you guys want to join, you'll definitely learn, and that'll probably be a good first step.
Selenium 3 focused.
Selenium 3 focused then,
yeah. It is.
Also, the Fandom.js project needs help on the driver because it's just me at the moment. Sorry for the shameless plug, but...
Does the Opera driver need more code? Kevin, do you need code? No, Kevin doesn't need any help. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we all hang out on IRC, on Freenode. So if you're, the channel name is Selenium. So if you'd like to talk to us or ask us questions, that's where you should go.
Hopefully that answered the question. Will Selenium 3 include all plausible capabilities to automate SVG and or Canvas component? Does the person who wrote that, is he in the room? Because I don't understand the question. I honestly don't understand the question, and I'd like to be able to give a really good answer, or at least an adequate answer, or at least an answer. Oh, at the back. Do you want to step up to the microphone and just sort of clarify the question a bit?
Our team basically, we have a future project coming in where everything's probably going to be done in SVG. And, looking at Selenium, I don't see too much wrapping around how to get inside of an SVG and be able to automate it.
Yeah, so we did have a discussion about SVG a while back. We should probably revisit that discussion. But so technically, an SVG document in itself is not shouldn't be a very problematic thing to interact with. But the problems come when you're using specialized namespaces. So we went into a discussion where if you're using namespaces in your SVG document, basically you can extend the syntax of the document. So one solution we were considering was auto-detecting namespaces. Another one is making it possible to manage namespaces as part of the user-facing API. I don't think we have landed on a good conclusion on that yet. But opinions are very welcome because we're starting to wrap up some of these parts of the WebDriver spec. So if you have very strong opinions on SVG, you should come and talk to us.
Did you want to add something?
As far as I know, SVG and Canvas both come with a JavaScript API. So worst case scenario, execute script and just hit it from the JavaScript side and get it done, I guess.
Certainly with Canvas, because it's part of HTML, you should be able to use the Advanced User Interactions API if you know like the coordinates you want to click on and stuff like that. Canvas is like a black box. We have no idea what the things you're drawing on it actually represent. It could be like the Unreal 3D engine, or it could be a mock UI, or it could be something absolutely bonkers. So yeah, you might be just resourcing to going, well, I think at this point is the thing that I need. Will we see jQuery selectors in the future? Do we want to just echo this at the same time?
1, 2, 3.
No.
Brilliant. So yeah, an explanation is probably helpful, right? Because as fun as that was. So the thing that we're doing with the WebDriver specification with the project is we're trying to allow you to automate your browser, right? And we're relying on published standards and specifications because they're not going to go away anytime soon. They're always going to be around. jQuery is lovely and it's fantastic, but it keeps on changing. It's an individual project. It isn't a standard. It isn't baked into the browsers themselves, and requires jQuery to have been loaded on the page. Now, the nice thing is that the mechanism we use for finding elements is extensible. So writing your own jQuery locator can be fairly trivial. It might be a case of just calling execute script if you happen to be using a specific version of jQuery on your site, or maybe you might have to inject jQuery onto the page before you call execute script and doing it. So we've given you the tools that you need in order to use jQuery, but we're not going to bake that support into the project, because by doing that, we commit ourselves to supporting jQuery indefinitely, which is a suboptimal experience. And supporting anything indefinitely is a suboptimal experience, right?
The other thing is that because like browser vendors taking it up, browser vendors won't want to support it either. Like Chrome won't support it, Mozilla won't support it, like we support those projects separately for web development, but we're not going to kind of put it into the browser automation because then it needs to go into a specific part of the tree, and kind of it mixes things up and people get very, very upset. So we want to kind of keep things as clean as possible, especially in the Mozilla code. And I would be surprised if the Chromium team and that didn't think the same way.
Cool. I hope that answered the question. Yeah, feel free to go to the... If you have got a question, by the way, and you are like on that side, just feel free to stand at the microphone. That'll be a really obvious hint.
So with WebDriver really being like baked into the browsers, is there any plans to support like file dialog, navigate, like, you know, downloading to the file system on the client?
File downloads. Are we going to support that, guys? Do we do this one again? 1, 2, 3.
No.
Oh, this is a lot better. I remember first time we did this, it was just me saying no. So, Jason, I know you've got feelings about the file downloads.
Yeah, you shouldn't be using WebDriver for that. You're not really testing anything about the web app. You're just making an HTTP request to the server. So just use a standalone client, grab it, download it, and do whatever you need to do with it.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, it's like, why are you downloading this file? If you're checking that you can download a file, browsers tend to work. Okay, it's relatively safe to assume that. A browser vendor might want to write a test to make sure that file downloads work. Feel free to ask a follow-up, because I can sense you having one.
Well, like in our case, we have a page that, say, generates a report, and there's a link to like download a PDF version or a spreadsheet version of that report, and that's actually generated on the server side. Sure. So you need to be like logged in and all that kind of stuff. So.
And when you download that PDF, do you then pull it apart and verify the contents of it and make sure it's all good in your test, or do you just go, oh, there is a file?
Well, the goal would be to actually do some verification on it eventually. Right now, I mean, we'd probably just be attaching it to our test case result and maybe inspect it later for verification.
Okay. Like, if it really, 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 really matters to you, there are settings in the Firefox driver that you can set that will enable you to always save files of this particular type to a particular location, and that's a workaround for it. But in terms of offering an API for just doing, like, interacting with random dialogues that might be thrown up by the operating system, that's not something we're going to do. Okay, and like, hopefully that was a clear answer, but at least gives you a way forward.
So I did some work on file uploads for Opera before we announced the switch to Blink, unfortunately. And the basically, you're moving into the sphere of OS automation when you start to consider interacting with OS dialogues. So most of the drivers we have already, perhaps with the exception of the IE driver, don't have any means of interacting with OS level dialogues. So technically, it would be also impossible, and you'd also have to supply implementations for each conceivable operating system. And also, exposing file dialog or exposing for file uploads through the browser is also a really big security hazard for the browser vendors. I spent like 5 months to convince the security team at Opera to implement this in the browser. So not anytime soon.
There's a workaround you can do. You should check out the source for the Gab framework. They wrap it really nicely. What they basically do is pull out the cookies out of the browser, set the cookies in an HTTP library that you can use in Python, Java, or whatever, and then download the file through that path and use any library you want to read it, parse it, and test the stuff out.
Thank you, Santi. There isn't another live question. Let's do this one then. How is Selenium and in extension WebDriver, which is Selenium, going to handle the shadow DOM and the new CSS3 rules such as transform?
Where's David Burns?
Shall I do shadow DOM and you can do CSS? Because you're having a whale of a time with that stuff. So shadow DOM, for those of you who don't know, is a new W3C specification that allows you, it's part of the web apps, suite of specs. And basically allows you to have your normal DOM, and then at a certain point, have what's known as a shadow DOM, which is a sort of extra subtree, which would appear as a single element in the parent DOM, in the hosting DOM, but is itself a huge subtree of its own, and itself can have shadow DOMs through it. The WebDriver specification on the W3C site actually already has a proposed API for how we're going to be handling this. Effectively, you will switch to the shadow DOM using the normal switch to mechanisms, and then you'll be able to navigate the subtree as if it were its own document. As for CSS transforms,
yeah. So CSS transforms, they're very, very interesting. So like, CSS3 kind of is pushing a lot of how it manipulates the rendering of the browser, like the DOM and things like that. It's doing things like that, so you don't require JavaScript. So originally, because say in Firefox driver, everything's written in JavaScript. Browsers have a single thread for JavaScript. So we kind of were relying on, we're executing something, so we kind of block that from anything else from happening, and then it kind of the page will carry on. And we could kind of do all these things. Then CSS3 kind of saw that web developers were struggling with JavaScript and doing all these things, so they kind of built this amazing spec, and it does it all. But it now means that from our point of view, we can't guarantee that we're kind of blocking the UI from doing any rendering. So now we kind of have to handle those things. There's also problems that we've handled. It's now been fixed, and kind of how, like if something got kind of transformed away from a page, if you were just going, oh, where is this element on the page? Kind of, it would just go, well, it's like if my hand's the viewport, it would go, it's here. It was returning that, and I was like, well, it's not. It's about 10,000 pixels that way, and we need to kind of handle that. So we've been kind of doing a lot of work. I did some really hacky fixes. It worked. Greg Dennis, who works at Google, has rewritten a lot of this code, and hopefully we'll be pushing it into the Selenium trees soonish. And it's going to sort those. But what we won't be able to handle, and it's something that the Web QA team and the automation team actually asked me just before this, is how do we handle kind of easing and things like that? Because now you say you've got...
what's easing?
Easing. Easing is if you've got, say, one element and it needs to move from there to there, so it does an animation, and you just do just a tiny bit of CSS, and it just tells it to move from there to there, and you can tell it which speed to move at and things like that. They need to now kind of know when something has been eased away and moved back in, because for Firefox OS is kind of doing these weird things. And is now making automation interesting. They're trying to solve these problems by now they need to kind of follow an element as it moves around the DOM, so that they know it's at roughly a specific place outside of the viewports, and then they can carry on with their automation. And this is kind of the types of problems that CSS transforms are bringing, and like animations are bringing. We kind of have to write all this extra verbose code now to kind of follow elements as they move around the DOM, or not the DOM, around the like render tree, and it's causing interesting times. Like it's problems that we'll probably eventually solve, but like transforms are. If you're very interested in transforms, I highly recommend going to Mozilla Developer Network and just kind of Googling for transforms and looking at how it all works. Your brain will probably melt, because mine did, while I was trying to solve all these problems. But you kind of start to see the intricacies that come with transforms, but at the same time you can then learn how, like, all the really cool things that you can do with it. So you could, build a Kindle type application page, and you can kind of transform pages from kind of being flat to upright and to flat on the other side, so you can kind of see a page turning, and you can do all this pure CSS, no JavaScript, doing the whole animation. and that's pretty awesome. But from an automator's point of view, it's interesting times ahead.
So in summary, Shadow DOM, not a problem. CSS3, ah!
Yeah.
Yes? Okay, good.
Well,
we could have done that answer in like half the time.
Yeah. well, the Shadow DOM, seems like it's not scary, but we haven't implemented it.
Yeah, the Shadow DOM the Shadow DOM in theory is incredibly simple, and in reality is vaguely terrifying.
Yes.
Good, excellent. Oh, live question, yes, please.
Okay, so speaking just for speed, if I use an object that's an ID, that has an ID, is it best, I'm just wondering, traversing the tree, so does it help to use multiple IDs to help guide down through the DOM? Say, you know, main window ID, then the table ID, and then an element in there? Or
ID should be a constant time lookup. They're cached by the browser. So you should be okay with a single one. Does anyone want to correct me on that? Because I'm wrong periodically. No. So a single ID would be best.
Okay.
You can only have, like, by standard, you can only have one ID per element.
I think that the question is like, if I put an ID on the table and I have a different ID on an element on the table, if I want to find that particular thing inside of it, would it be faster to find the table and then the thing inside of it? Or do I go straight for that thing?
Straight to it.
Yes, so I'm assuming you collect the IDs.
So with IE 7 and earlier, the more IDs you have on the page, it actually can hurt performance. So you need to be careful with how often you use IDs on old versions of IE. I think they've fixed that. But yeah, if you had too many IDs, it'll actually slow down because it's IE.
Only on IE 6 and 7. Only on IE 6 and 7. Please use IDs.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
Thank
IDs
you.
should be really fast,
Right.
and you don't need to nest them. Okay, why don't web elements expose actions such as hover, double click, or drag and drop? Well, and the simple answer is, what was that? They used to back in the day. Yeah, rendered web element, which we deleted. The main thing is that the thing doing the hovering, the thing doing the double clicking, and the thing doing the drag and drop isn't the web element. It's the mouse, right? So we've moved that functionality into actions because it's just a better, cleaner, more object-oriented way of writing our APIs and interfaces. And yet there's a click, and that's because we just do it all the time. Yeah, and really what I ought to do. So click on web element is really interesting, right? Because click and send keys are what I like to refer to as do what I mean APIs. And the advanced user interactions are do what I say APIs. So by that I mean, like, if you click on an option in a select that has multiple selections and that supports that, has a multiple attribute set to true. If you use WebElement.click and you click the element once, it'll be selected. If you click it again, it'll be deselected. If you try that trick with the advanced user interactions, it will stay selected, because on web element we assume that what you mean is to toggle the state of it, and so we'll make it easy to do that. But if you're using the advanced user interactions API, you're assumed to be professional and knowing what you're doing, and therefore you just wanted to fire like the click event at that particular coordinate, which is kind of quirky. No, I mean, it's a perfectly reasonable question. But the main reason is it breaks object orientation, and we should stop that stuff. Is there a central link? Does anyone else want to add anything to that, by the way? Okay. Is there a central link for all of the Selenium Conf presentation docs?
Twitter.
Ashley, down here. Hold on. Here we go.
So yeah, we've gotten a lot of questions about this. All of the slides will be posted to our SlideShare account, which is slideshare.com/seleniumconf. All of the videos will be posted to our Selenium Conf YouTube channel. They will also be emailed to you as soon as they're live. We'll put it on Twitter. We'll put it on Selenium HQ blog. Selenium HQ will tweet about it. So you will see them on the internet.
Thank you. This is Ashley. She's like done so much work to get this conference going. Does someone else want to read the questions? I'm happy to keep on doing it. Okay, I'll keep on doing it.
We're happy for you to keep doing it.
Yeah, thanks. Luke said he was happy for me to keep doing it. Oh yeah, it's my quaint accent, isn't it? Okay, what is the best way to determine what Selenium tests are the most valuable to avoid creating useless or too many tests? I guess we need Trish Koo up here, right? But failing that, somebody who, Jason, you did a whole presentation on this stuff, right?
I don't know. I would turn them off and see how long it takes the developers to complain. We always joke at Google that the first rule of writing WebDriver tests is to not write WebDriver tests. There's always, in my opinion, there's almost always a better way to test something, but it's kind of a weird opinion to have when I'm working on this project.
You're not alone, though. So it boils back down, like, why are we writing tests? Is it so we can say that we execute n million tests a day? Is it so that when someone looks at each of the requirements that's come into the system, we can say, look, we've got an end-to-end test that covers each of those requirements? Or are we doing it to verify that our software functions as we said it would? Right? You don't need to do an end-to-end test for every piece of functionality. You can do unit tests, you can do medium tests. Like at Google, we long ago used to talk about like the ratios of small, medium, large. So unit test, integration test, end-to-end test, and that was 70-20-10. Like a minority of your tests really should be end-to-end ones. Because you can get the same level of coverage and the same confidence that your software is robust with smaller and therefore faster and also more stable tests, either integration or unit tests.
Good question to ask is always, is there JavaScript involved in this? Is it heavy on the client side? If you're just testing an HTML web form with no JavaScript whatsoever, there's no real point on using a browser. Cross-browser testing doesn't make any sense at that point. So keep it in mind. Try to focus on heavy client-side applications or features.
Anyone else want to add anything? Okay. Apparently we've answered that question flawlessly. Okay. What are strategies for compensating for the inherent random flakiness of browsers and the interwebs? Borin8765. Somebody who works at Source should probably answer that, because you... Yes.
I wasn't paying attention.
So, what are strategies for compensating for the inherent random flakiness of browsers and the interwebs?
Oh, that's a tricky one.
Write fewer tests.
Yeah, there's all sorts of things you can do. Focus on the stability of the machines. Try to eliminate state. We had to get to the point in which we destroy a full VM after Selenium test touches it. That's the kind of the highest level of stability that you can get to, but there's still going to be state. There's still going to be edge cases. We're talking about a full-on browser with a JavaScript VM, with a rendering engine running on top of an operating system. Generally, it's Windows. Sometimes it's old versions of Windows. So making things more reliable is a constant struggle, and you'll never get kind of 100% through. So try to reduce the amount of Selenium tests. Flaky detection, it's all trade-offs, right? Coverage for speed, doesn't make sense, stability. There's a lot of questions you need to answer.
There are other things as well. Jason?
I would add that you should limit the number of services you're bringing up in your tests. You rarely want to test the entire stack, because each service you bring up is something that could fall over in your test. So try and test things in isolation. If you don't need that a real database there, and bring up an in-memory mock, your test will be faster and more stable. So just identify all the components and what you're actually testing, and replace the things you don't need.
Also, like every time you hit the UI, you're rolling the dice of flakiness and instability, right? That's your choice. The best way to avoid losing that particular gamble is to touch the UI as little as possible. So part of this is around data setup and asserting whether or not particular pieces of information have been written to data stores, right? If you're trying to set up a test user and you've got a lovely admin interface, don't go through that lovely admin interface. Just shove the data into the backend and make sure that user already exists. If you want to make sure that after you've completed an operation that the right data is in the database, don't go through the UI over the internet. Just query it using JDBC or the equivalent API for your library, right? Don't roll the dice any more times than you have to, because every time you do, you might lose. Okay, anyone else want to add to that? Any experiences from eBay or anything?
Yeah, so what I usually do, and if I really have to write a Selenium test and it's kind of flaky, I start everything on my laptop and I run the same test 20 times in parallel in 20 Chromes. Because that's the fastest that I find to find the flakiness. If I start 20 in parallel, it maxes out everything. And if I'm messing up with my weight and they are not right, it crashes right away.
Okay, so there we go. Identify your flaky tests, I think was what yep. What is the status and roadmap for the Safari driver, Jason?
I will review any patches you want to contribute.
Okay. There we go. So I think that what that means is that the one person who is happy to work on the Safari driver has gone sufficiently far to scratch their particular itches, and it's an open source project, and we'd really love some help increasing the support for it, particularly if we're not meeting the needs that you have. Okay. Why are there so many different methods to manage timeouts that all seem to have different undocumented behavior? It's because we like messing with you. That's not really the reason. Does anyone else want to have a go at this, or shall I?
As to why, I don't have a good answer, but they are documented, just not where you expect them to be. They're mostly documented on the Grid 2 wiki page, so I don't remember what they all do. I have to look at the wiki page pretty frequently. I think there's like 7 of them now, but they all have a very specific purpose. I agree it ought to be cleaned up somehow, but no one smart enough has been able to figure out how to do that.
Yeah, and that's the problem, right? There are loads of people go, I want a timeout, and you go, what do you want the timeout for? And they go, well, I want a page loading timeout. Like, I want to start loading a page, and if it doesn't load within n seconds, I want to fail, right? And then they want to go, I don't want to use explicit weights, so I want to use implicit weights, and that needs also needs a timeout, but it needs to be a different timeout. So can I have a timeout for that, please? And then, it starts growing. There are all these very specific use cases that we're attempting to hit. Did you want to add anything? Okay, cool. Am I the only one who gets stale element reference exceptions? I don't get them, so that's okay. When defining web elements in my page object code, and therefore prefers to define bilocators, which can be used to call find element when needed, including after catching one. This is a race condition. This is classic race condition, right? You've attempted to find an element, and something is happening. And do you know why a stale element exception gets thrown?
Explain it.
Okay, I will. You've got a microphone. You could just tell me to explain it.
Explain it.
There we go. So what happens is when we find an element on the DOM, we give it a handle, and that handle is an ID that we use to refer to it throughout the rest of the tests. And that means that if you do things like reordering lists, for example, you can maintain a reference to the original element that you wanted to, rather than the one that is in the same location that it used to be in. The thing that happens quite often with JavaScript libraries is they will completely remove an element from the DOM and replace it with an identical one that is very slightly different, or sometimes just an identical one, right, that is completely the same. That new element isn't the same as the old one, right? And so the reason why you're getting the stale element reference exceptions is because you've lost a race. You've performed a click, you've done something, the JavaScript is taking a finite amount of time to execute. It's going to replace the element, and it's going to update things, and it's going to refresh your UI in some way, which won't appear to cause a huge change in its appearance, but will have changed the underlying DOM. While that JavaScript is executing, you've gone, hey, look, find me the element. You've got the element that used to be there. You then go, okay, fine, now I want to do something. Time has passed. You've lost the race. The new element is there. You send the command, and the element that the reference you had has disappeared. So that's why you're seeing the stale element reference exception. How do you avoid it, I think, is probably the more interesting question. Like, Not does anyone else see it? Yes, they do. How do I prevent it happening? So the thing is that the trick is that we're executing JavaScript and it's taking a finite amount of time. And what we're doing is effectively like clicks, particularly the operating system level ones, are asynchronous. They're returning before we know that everything's finished executing. So don't do complete black box testing. Some of the JavaScript libraries, like jQuery, for example, have counters for how many active operations they have. They have counters to see whether or not they're still performing animations and things like that. I saw that covered in at least one presentation here over the past 2 days. You can use execute script to figure out whether the JavaScript that you expect to finish executing has actually done, and then, and only then, so after using an explicit wait, do you continue running a test. Does anyone want to add anything to it? Have any of you guys got tricks that you use to avoid stale element reference exceptions?
Whenever I find them, so as Simon was saying, whenever I find them or come across them, that means there's a timing condition, and it usually always means I need to add a WebDriver wait, and it's pretty much a, always.
Okay. Too long and involved. I can't believe it. How long have we got left, by the way? Is anyone keeping time? 30 minutes. We could cut it, or I'm quite happy to carry on because I'm having a whale of a time.
We have 30 more minutes, or we've already hit them? Oh.
Okay.
Oh. Is everyone getting tired of us?
We can dance.
Santi, go on, Santi.
We got other skills.
Okay, thank you, Santi. Oh, there's a question over here.
So is a possible solution to that rather than putting in an obscene number of explicit waits, possibly writing a function that says if I get a stale element exception, throw it away and look for it again, look for that element again. Is that like a viable?
So instead of using a wait, use a function that throws away and tries to reload the element. Right. But you'd still need the function call. Like, you wouldn't be cleaning up your code base very much.
You're essentially masking your timing problem and putting it all into this relookup mechanism. So yes, that could work, but now, in my opinion, you're not paying attention to how your app interacts and how its state is actually maintained. So you click on something, something changes, you get the stale element, but in my opinion, it's more explicit. So your page object or wherever in your test code says, okay, I've clicked it. Now I've got to wait for this element to become stale or wait for this other thing to appear. And that says that I know the state of how my application works. So it's more, in my opinion, it's getting to that you know how your app functions, and when it changes, you know how it's supposed to change.
And if it's me, I want that wait, even if there are an obscene amount of them, because I'm not going to be maintaining that code in a month. And the person that comes behind me, I want them to be able to know, yeah, I need to wait for this next thing to happen. So I want those waits in that code so that the next guy who comes behind me can actually understand what the state of the application is and what I expect my code to do.
Hello. I was wondering, sometimes when you call toString on a web element, you get this nice little toString that says, here's the locator I use to find myself. That seems to be unavailable any other place but the toString method. You can't ask a web element what was your locator used to locate you. It has to have been something that was set as a result of calling find element on the WebDriver. And so I'm thinking about Josh Block and how he says when you implement toString, don't put anything in there that you can't get to via any other public API. So is there a possibility that we could see introduced the ability to get the locator out that was used to find that element?
So what about when you find an element from execute script?
No, I understand. I'm saying sometimes it's there, sometimes it's not. But when it is there, you can't get to it.
But then we get into an awkward situation where we're adding a method to the API that doesn't always work. And
Right.
what is the behavior when it wasn't found through find element?
Right. What I'm worried about, though, is having to write code. I'm sure people are writing code to parse out the toString for the locator.
Don't do that.
I haven't, but I'm sure it's happening.
So I added that method, right? The reason why I did that is as a debugging aid, because quite often people go like, this is the element that I'm failing on, right? And it turned out that people were incapable of reading their own code and figuring out where that element had come from, which I found deeply alarming, right? I think people should be able to read their own tests and figure out where this particular thing has come from by looking at things like stack traces. However, just to make life a bit easier, I added this as a utility, right? So you've got the path that you went to get there. I don't want to expose the underlying buy because people will do absolutely crazy things like writing a function that will attempt to reload an element if it's not there to mask an underlying problem that they should be addressing in their code. Like, it's a nice thing to have, but it shouldn't be required functionality in order for you to write your tests.
Okay, so
in my opinion.
I mean, I guess that makes sense. So the people who are doing the wrong thing and parsing the toString method to do something really bad are doing okay, that sounds like a decent
Yeah, and the nice thing is, because they're doing something really nasty, the fact you're doing something nasty tells you something, right?
Right.
Tells you that you're doing something nasty and maybe you shouldn't be doing it.
Sorry, what was that? You can always subclass the web element and make it public, right? It's just 3 or 4 lines of code, maybe 15 in Java, but at the end of the day, it's the same thing.
I think it's about 50, actually. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marcus. I think the request was how many people actually want that? Okay, 1. Two. Okay, any best practices for modifying a Selenium test code during a site redesign or testing experiments to test both the old and new versions simultaneously? Does anyone want to have a go at answering that? Use page objects and have separate implementations of them.
It's very hard. Sorry. Doing that sort of thing, in my experience, has been very, very difficult, if not extremely error-prone. Yeah.
Okay, so it turns out to be a really difficult problem. It's like, how would you support 2 versions of your application in prod live, and you were moving from one database, you were moving from like a database to a NoSQL thing, right? How would you support that? And you'd probably have to go through the same sort of mechanisms where you introduce a series of interfaces and you have some level of indirection and you do magic.
Exactly. So essentially, normally if you're doing this and you have 2 versions of your code somewhere, or 2 versions of your site, hopefully that's on a branch. The code your test code that was for one branch is running in the branch that your new code is, then you modify that code to reflect that functionality.
Cool. Did you want to add something, Jim?
That was my answer.
Jim was going to say exactly the same thing. It's nice when people think alike. Ooh. Is there any valid reason or reasons someone might build a custom framework and not just JUnit to test NG? I think we do this one together, right? 1, 2, 3. No. There is no valid reason. Sorry, I missed you over there. Please, what's your question?
I just had an answer for his question, actually.
You were going to ask this one?
No, the site changing A/B test thing. So I work at Zeus, where we constantly run A/B tests. That's like all we do. And we have this problem every day. And this is the only good example I can think where I'm glad that the by X path exists, because there's an OR. And frequently, that solves the problem for us. Or we just detect the A/B test with finding some element and then have an A and a B. And a lot of times ours are moderated not on versions of the site, but on like things like user ID. Like frequently we'll give users mod 1 something, users mod 2 something else. So that's how we handle it, and it works quite well for us.
So I'm a real firm believer that you should know what you're testing before you start testing it. And if the thing you're testing changes randomly, then it's not fair on anyone, right?
But it's not random. Like, say, users in set A get one version of the sign-up page, and users in set B get another.
Okay.
And we're just trying to see which one signs up more people, right? So it's
So-
the same page, but maybe the buttons are in a different
So you'd have
order.
2 tests?
No, it's the same test.
And no, I'm saying that I would write 2 tests, one for A, one for B, and I would make sure that when I ran the A test, I got the A site, and when I ran the B test, I'd run the B site. I wouldn't try and second guess myself, right? That would be what I would be doing, but I'm hard ass like that.
Kind of like what Jason said, eliminate moving parts. You're eliminating the A/B testing framework. Take the randomness out, figure out a way to make your test enforce a branch, test a branch, and then enforce the other branch. Do it with whatever get params. There's multiple ways to do this in testing, but it's just removing another part that is adding complexity to your system.
Usually it's up to your developers. I suppose you are a tester. So it's up to the developers to give you instruments so that you can force yourself into one A or B. If they are not doing that, then punch them in the face.
I'm going to make you answer more questions.
I do exactly that for my developers. I mean, personally, I do that for my developers all the time. They need to know how to test A or B. If they don't tell you that, they just change the page and your test fail, they're assholes.
And this is why there are a bunch of developers running around Amazons with black eyes.
Okay. You're not going to hit me hard. If one is starting again from complete scratch, how should a language selection, Python, Ruby, Java, .NET, PHP, so-and-so, proceed? Which is best?
That's in the etc.
Well, anyone? Gary, you might have an opinion.
Just use Ruby.
Just use Java.
Just use .NET.
I hear there's some Haskell bindings out there.
Wait, no, I kid you not. There are VB script bindings out there. You should use that.
Anyone else? Go on.
I'm going to give a serious answer, actually. The procedure for picking a language, there's a lot of things you want to consider. What do your people already know? What's fresh in the market? Like, are you going to be able to hire people who know how to code in Haskell or Ruby or Java or whatever? What's your application written in? Are you going to reuse the database layer from your application? Then it probably makes sense to keep the same language. There's a lot of questions you need to answer. Spend some time and don't just play the fanboy and say, I'm going to do Python just because I like it.
I don't think market conditions really factor into that. It should be a matter of what do your developers use. At Google, the teams that are most effective with automation are the ones where the developers are actually involved in the process. And the easiest way to get a developer to write a test is to eliminate a context switch. So if they're writing in Python, asking them to bust out Java is just a non-starter. They're not going to do it. They're going to ignore you and move on to the next feature. So if you write your production code in Java, write your tests in Java. If you use Python, write your tests in Python.
But this is, I mean, I agree with Santi and I agree with Jason, but this isn't the problem, right? If you want to use a language, there's no binding for it. You can just write it yourself. That's the beauty of the wire protocol.
For a contrarian view, wait a minute, I have to channel Adam Goucher here for a moment. You do not need to use the language that your application is coded in. If you have a separate team of testers who know one language, let them use that language to automate, and let the developers develop in the language that they are comfortable developing in. That's Adam Goucher's view. I personally prefer to have everything in the same language.
To that point, though, there's no stopping anyone from using Jenkins, setting up multiple jobs, having tests run in Java, Python, PHP, and Ruby all at the same time. With Salesforce, we actually do that. We have tests written in, well, we do that too. Selenium project has tests running in our Jenkins CI against, well, are they running? No, they're not really running. Just the Java ones are running.
Sorry, there's a gen there.
Briefly, this is my question, and really what I was trying to get at, I wasn't specific enough in terms of best. What I was asking about in terms of best is support from the community and libraries that are available.
Okay.
Examples online, good documentation.
Okay.
In terms of bootstrapping
Do you wanna do
ourselves
this?
into complicated.
Yeah, so there's the four main supported by the project language bindings: Java, PHP, or Java,
PHP,
Java, Python,
Ruby.
Ruby, C#,
JavaScript.
Oh yeah, JavaScript. We always forget that one. Sorry, Jason. Those are the ones you'll get the most traction from. We are in IRC every day. We'll help you with problems if there are any. We'll even help you figure out what you might be doing wrong with your example script, or if you need help. Selenium HQ, we've tried to do examples for those. They've been, in the past, Java heavy. I tried, especially on the WebDriver page, you can see examples in those four languages that we do. Well, okay, the fifth one is relatively new, and there's not very many examples. So we try, and patches are welcome to the docs, of course.
In terms of the libraries that we ship with the official bindings, the Java one is the most fully fleshed out, but that's because it's the oldest, and I ran into a lot of places where it was useful to have that code. But I don't think there's much in it. Like, it's a fairly simple API, and it's pretty easy to wrap. And if you're writing page objects, you're not going to be interacting with it, hopefully, a huge amount beyond sort of fairly basic operations. So I would pick whichever one is most appropriate for the situation you're in, and disregard, how many libraries there are, because the APIs feel the same between platforms. So if you find an example of how to do something in Java, you can apply it in Ruby. Like, the same principles, the same underlying approach will work.
I think we have a question.
Question at the microphone.
So if I could return to the stale element reference exception problem, what I do, what happens with me, is that the form that I work on, I have to go around all the time, going up and down the form, since certain things change after certain actions. So I get that I do explicit waits everywhere, pretty much, but I do find that I have to find the element again, since my explicit wait will wait for an element that's right before would be stale, and then I wait for it, and then it's fine, but then I have to go back up the form, and that form has changed that element. So in that case, wouldn't I have to still find that element again? Because there's no amount of waiting that would solve that problem, right? Or
Can I just make sure I've interpreted that correctly?
Yeah.
You're saying that your form is incredibly dynamic and things keep on changing?
Yeah, it is, definitely.
Oh, it just means that every time you want to interact with an element, you'll need to look it up. Like, there's nothing else you can do, right?
Yeah, that's pretty well. Yeah, just.
What I would, in your particular case, though, what I would do is if I'm about to perform an action that I know will cause a particular element to disappear from the form as it gets redrawn, I would get a reference to the element, perform the action, and then there's an expected condition where you can wait for the staleness of something. So I'd wait until I knew that it was safe to proceed before then proceeding.
Oh, okay, yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, all right.
Maybe
thanks.
not okay, but.
Thanks.
Does anyone have anything else they want to add to that? All right, shall we do a couple more questions and then? Okay. There's 3 questions left. Why don't we do the bottom one first? Whatever happened to the Boston Selenium meetup group? Who's a local?
That'd be me. All right, so this is a really interesting thing happened, I guess. We had like 170 people on the meetup at one point, and we did like 6 or 7 of these, and I was the guest speaker at about 2/3 of them. For like roughly the remaining third, they were traveling dignitaries like Santi and Adam Goucher. So basically, I ran out of things to talk about, and people stopped traveling to Boston, and then try as I might, I could not find any of the other 169 people in the group to give a talk. This would be like an excellent opportunity for someone that wants to try to get more involved. I'm willing to help you work on slides, come up with a topic, scope things properly. Feel free to contact me. I would love to get more people involved, but I'm not going to have a meetup just to get people together, because everyone's antisocial and they don't want to do that anyway.
Kevin's antisocial.
Having said that, Dave Jellison, the co-organizer, just set up a new meetup. So it'll be a kind of like a Selenium Conf 2013 recap, and I think that's happening in about 2 weeks. So we'll see who shows up and how alive the group is.
I would highly recommend people, if they want to get into kind of speaking at, like for Selenium conference next year or whatever, if they want to start practicing for that, user groups are brilliant for that, and you should kind of stand up in front of those people, because they tend to be smaller groups and kind of, they're not as intimidating as kind of standing up in front of 450 of you. So I would highly recommend getting into user groups and kind of trying to do talks that way, and like even expand to different user groups around your local city and kind of just show them all the cool things you're doing.
Okay. Anyone else? I think we're good.
I had a comment actually. If there's no Selenium community in your area or your city, you should look up a video of a talk Selenium Conf last year Ashley gave on how to organize a Selenium meetup. It was super valuable. A lot of people got their meetup set based on that, and she's got a lot of experience to share, so check that out.
All right.
I am not biased.
Okay, so next question, second to last. How to access the proxy object to get dynamic request images? What? Example, thank you. At www.indiestar.com, try to pick the image call that goes to blah, 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 blah. Or capture the image on usatoday.com that goes to some URL.
Browser mob, get the hard?
Jacqueline, are you in the room? Or have you run away? Or are you online? You're probably online, right? I don't understand the question. I assume it's got something to do with proxies. Because it's got the word proxy in it. If that's the case, then hook a proxy into the browser that you're using the APIs we have, and have that record the data.
The other way you can do it is if you want to stop certain actions happening, Browser Mob Proxy's got a way to blacklist and whitelist URLs, and you can there's client bindings for Browser Mob Proxy in most languages, and you can kind of just go, I don't want going there, or there is a mechanism that you can get the HTTP archive, the HAR, and then you can kind of just walk through that, because it returns a JSON blob, because that's how the standard is, and then you can kind of programmatically walk through that to find what you want, and then you can kind of get the status codes and things like that.
You can also register handlers for callbacks when the browser is processing a request. It has an asynchronous model. It has the browser proxy. That's an asynchronous model in which you can register requests.
There's also in the spec, you can always pull out the performance log, and that includes all the traffic. Michael Klepikov?
Yeah, Michael.
He gave a whole talk on that. So check that out. No proxies involved.
Jacqueline is online. According.
Look at the camera.
Hi, Jacqueline. I really hope we answered the question. I know we probably didn't. If we didn't answer your question correctly, a really good place to go would either be the #Selenium IRC channel, probably on Monday when we're all back at work, or the WebDriver user group on Google Group. Okay, final question.
Wait, no one has anything about Selenium?
Selenium 3 is deeply uncontentious.
Apparently.
I'm trying to automate the process of capture. Okay, there's a microphone question. Yeah, Jacqueline, I think there's an updated question. I think it's best to ask on the mailing lists.
So this question is probably more for Kevin. I attended the grid workshop.
Oh, great.
And the company I work for, it's a Windows shop, and so I was curious if you know of any successful implementations of the grid on a Windows instead of a Unix box, because there's not a lot of resources for it online.
The simple answer is no. I mean, the hub runs on the JVM, so if you know what you're doing, you should be able to do it. I'm not a Windows system administrator, so as far as tools like process monitoring and setting up centralized logging and things like that, I'm most comfortable in Linux, and all the large-scale grid installations I'm aware of use Linux, but a lot of it will run fine in Java. Like setting up the Java util logger, there's nothing Linux specific about that. You can log over a network.
Right.
You're just going to kind of be on your own, too.
All right, thanks.
Sorry.
I'll be contacting you online, so.
Francois, you ran a large grid setup. Do you want to have anything to add?
I'm not running on Windows, but I have some Windows Node, but everything that we do could be done exactly the same on Windows, I assume. We're using VMware, and we're using the VMware Web Services. We access that from Linux, but from Windows, that would be exactly the same thing.
Oh, hang on, go on.
Hi, just a comment. I just want to thank you guys for this conference, for your work, for everything you've done. It's made my job so much easier and better. So just thank you.
Thank you very much. It's really nice to hear that you enjoyed it and found it useful. Thank you. So, well, I'm feeling all happy now. Final question. Can you give us a brief update on the W3C standard? How's it going? How far along is it? And how will it improve our lives as Selenium users developers? I'll have a crack at this, and then maybe you have a crack at it as well.
I think this is the leading question.
A brief update on the W3C standard. For the next 2 days after this, Thursday, Friday, a whole gang of us are going to be meeting at the W3C offices here in Boston to have a face-to-face meeting about the standard and hopefully push it forward a bit. There's a pretty long agenda, which is quite good fun. And so there's going to be a lot of discussion. Once the quarter is over, it should start moving a bit more quickly. The problem that we've had on the spec is that it's basically David and myself who do a lot of the writing on it, with contributions from other people, obviously, but the editing in particular. And I've recently taken on a new job, which has been hugely exciting and quite consuming. And David's been working flat out to get Marionette ready to get that into Firefox. So the people who would be doing the work haven't been giving it the focus that they could have. How far along is it? It's not in too bad shape. Most of the sections are now have content in them. They're fleshed out. There isn't a test suite, and we haven't documented the wire protocol. Those are the two big things that we're missing at the moment. But we could move that along. And finally, how will it improve your lives? Well, it'll mean that if something goes wrong, you can talk to the browser vendors, and the browser vendors are intimately tied into the development process of their own browser, one would hope. And that means that they've got the ability to do things that we as outsiders just can't do. Like Microsoft, for example, or Mozilla, or the Chrome project could do an implementation of getText that was incredibly efficient and did all the caching and the lookups. And then maybe you could do like getBodyText, and it would be lightning fast. That would be like one place where you could do it. So hopefully you'll see a slightly more stable, slightly more enjoyable experience, consistent experience between different browsers, with the ability to go to the browser vendor and go, look, we really need some help with this. That would be good.
Going forward, I think if we have enough implementations by browser vendors, so we have something from Opera, we have something from Chrome, Mozilla's not far behind, it kind of starts putting pressure on the other two major browsers to kind of start implementing it, and kind of hoping we get there. We now have Microsoft joining the working group. It doesn't mean there's going to be an implementation, but it means they've started to have conversations with us, and kind of they're going to rip apart the spec and come back to us and go, well, no, we don't want this, we do want that, and you know, so we're going to have really good conversations around that. And because kind of the thing is that people who automate, like say if you guys are using WebDriver for testing, if you if you're using it for certain browsers, you get to a stage where you go, well, I'm not going to be supporting those browsers because I can't prove that my tests work on those browsers, so I'm not going to support them. You're going to kind of ask your users not to use those browsers, which is kind of bad for the web. But so, like, the more implementations there are, the more browsers, it's a good thing for the web. I know it makes life hard for everyone, but it's a good thing for the web. And we kind of, if we can get more people implementing WebDriver in a browser, then it's kind of going to expand and we can do really cool things going forward.
Yeah, and also browser vendors are also intimately interested in having WebDriver implementations to be able to test conformance test suites from other W3C standards. So, for example, the HTML and CSS working groups are also moving forward and considering doing functional testing of some of their specs. So they've been involved in some of the work going on in testing the web forward, which has been sort of hailed by Mozilla. So apart from the Selenium project and apart from being able to automate web applications, there are also, for us as web users, this is perhaps going to make the web a little more stable to ensure that there are no regressions in HTML parsers and CSS parsers and that sort of thing.
Should we make a request for Apple to join?
Toby, we can. Apple, it would be lovely if you came and joined us. Join us. Join us. Toby Langle from Facebook is currently leading a W3C test effort, and part of his work is focusing on how to harness WebDriver in order to do certain amounts of testing. So there is a lot of interest within the W3C, which means hopefully we're going to get decent support from all the browsers. There is one place where your life might not be as convenient, and I think we're at that point already, which is each of the drivers may require a separate executable or a shim in order to speak the wire protocol and work natively and properly. I'm afraid that may be unavoidable just because of the way that people implement things. But hopefully we'll be able to package things up and make it easy to use and a one-click install or something like that, or just make it simple to update, right? So yes, there will be a certain amount of discomfort around that, but I think it's completely manageable. And the trade-off, the benefit we get in exchange for that is just massive. Okay. I think we've probably reached the end of the questions. Did anyone want to have anything else to add about the spec? All right. Well, I'd personally like to say thank you to all the other committers. The project wouldn't be half as much fun as it is to be part of without you. The Selenium channel is like a really fun place to hang out. So thank you for being awesome. Adequate. Perfectly adequate. And thank you all for coming along to Selenium Conf 2013. 2014, we're going to start having the discussions about where to have that on the mailing lists, probably the WebDriver one. I'd like it to be out of America. We did the first one in San Francisco, second one in London, third one Boston. Be nice to do outside. The thing that we really need is volunteers on the ground to help us organize it. So yes, we'll kick off that conversation, and I think it's going to be great fun. So hopefully I'll see some of you in 2014. But until then, thank you very much, guys.